The first time Gary made me vomit into my own dinner plate, I was 13. I can still feel the cold metal of that folding chair biting into the backs of my legs while the smell of beef stew clung to the air like poison. I was shaking, tears blurring my plate, but Gary just sat across from me, clicking his stopwatch like it was all some kind of sport. He didn't flinch when I gagged. He didn't move when I finally lost it and the stew came back up. He just scribbled a number on his notepad, another charge added to my so-called debt. That's when I realized this wasn't about food. It was about control. Gary wasn't even my dad. He was my mother's husband. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled a doorway without saying a word. He liked to remind us often that his paycheck was the only thing keeping the roof over our heads. My mom, Laura, worked as a cashier at a grocery store, and he never let her forget it. At dinner, his voice was law. No one left the table until plates were clean, his plates, piled high like we were contestants in an eating contest. My mom and her portions? Small, neat, quiet. Mine? Mountains. Always more than anyone else's, stacked so high I couldn't see over them. I have autism, which for me means certain textures hit my brain like nails on glass. Mushy carrots, slimy mushrooms, chewy meat, sometimes even the smell alone made my throat close. But Gary didn't believe in that. Autism's just an excuse for bad parenting, he'd sneer, slamming a scoop of mashed potatoes onto my plate. There's no such thing as not liking food. There's only spoiled kids who need discipline. Laura tried, once. I remember that night as clear as yesterday. I had spent 3 hours at the table gagging on Brussels sprouts until I threw up, sobbing into my napkin. Later, I heard her whisper through their bedroom door, suggesting smaller portions, maybe skipping foods that made me sick. Gary's voice dropped into that terrifying, icy tone he reserved for threats. "If you undermine me again," he said, "I'll leave. See how well you pay the mortgage on your little cashier job." The next morning, she didn't say another word. From then on, the routine was always the same. Gary at the head of the table. My mom on his right, silent, pushing her food around. And me, center stage, every bite monitored. If I chewed too slowly, he tapped his watch. If I gagged, he called it drama. The night I vomited directly onto the plate, he made me sit there for another hour staring at it. He said it was punishment for wasting food. I started to dread 5:30 p.m., the new mandatory dinner time. No excuses allowed. He'd even moved it earlier so homework couldn't save me. I'd sit in class with my stomach twisting, counting down the hours until the torture began again. My mother's face during those meals is burned into me. She'd keep her eyes down, fingers tight around her fork, lips pressed thin like she was swallowing her own voice. Sometimes, when Gary went to the kitchen for seconds, she'd try to slip me smaller portions, but he always noticed. And when he caught her, he'd give her that smile. Not a real smile, the kind that stretched tight across his face, teeth showing but no warmth. It wasn't just the food. It was the silence. The way he made her afraid. The way I knew, deep down, that no one was going to save me. By 7th grade, it started leaking into school. The cafeteria smell would hit me and I'd start panicking, chest tight, vision tunneling. Teachers thought I was sick. The nurse thought I was underfed. The counselor tried calling home once, but Gary picked up and told them I was just an attention seeker. After that, I stopped eating lunch entirely. Better to starve than risk throwing up in public. Then came that night. Gary's company dinner. His boss's house in Worthington, Ohio. He spent a whole week drilling us like we were soldiers, new clothes, rehearsed introductions, scripted small talk. He was up for a promotion, and this dinner was his test. I'll never forget the smell when they set the plate in front of me. Lamb with mint sauce. Roasted vegetables slick with butter. The mint hit my nose first, sharp and oily, and the room tilted. Elaine Carter, the boss's wife, smiled sweetly. "You need to try the lamb, dear. It's my special recipe." She loves lamb, Gary said through clenched teeth. Don't you, Madison? My fork felt like it weighed 10 pounds. I cut the tiniest piece, chewed, and swallowed. It was like rubber soaked in perfume. My throat clenched. I whispered, "Please, I need the bathroom." After dinner, Gary hissed, never breaking eye contact with Mr. Carter. I tried. I really did. But my body betrayed me. In front of the entire table, Mr. Carter, his wife, Gary's co-workers, I vomited. It splattered across the white tablecloth, onto Elaine Carter's silk blouse, the smell of mint sauce mixing with bile. The last thing I saw before blacking out was Gary's face. Not angry, not panicked, just cold. I woke up later in the backseat of his car. My mother held me, trembling, while Gary drove in silence. The leather reeked of air freshener and vomit. His knuckles were bone white on the wheel. At home, he sent me straight to my room. I heard him slamming cabinets downstairs, muttering under his breath. My mother came up later with crackers and water, smoothing my hair back with shaking hands. The next morning, the folding chair was waiting for me at the table. My usual seat was gone. On the counter sat his notepad, neat columns of numbers. At the top of the page, damages. Dry cleaning. Carpet cleaning. Lost promotion. The total, $15,285. You're going to pay back every cent, he said without looking up. Starting with your college fund. That was the day the chair became permanent. The day eating stopped being about food and became about debt. The day Gary turned survival into numbers. And that was only the beginning. Because Gary wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The next morning, when I saw that folding chair waiting for me at the kitchen table, I thought it was some kind of sick joke. It wasn't. Gary sat there with his notepad, calm as ever, while my mom, Laura, lingered by the sink with a dish rag she wouldn't let go of. My usual seat had vanished. The only chair left was the metal folding one, icy against my legs even through my pajamas. Gary slid a paper across the table, his handwriting neat and deliberate. Damages. Dry cleaning, $85. Carpet cleaning, $200. Lost promotion, $15,000. Total, $15,285. You'll pay back every cent, he said, voice flat. We'll start with your college fund. Laura whispered, she's 13, but Gary just turned his head slowly toward her. Then she'll learn the value of money early. That was the day I became his project. From then on, dinner wasn't just about eating, it was about numbers. He kept a running tab of every failure, taped right onto the refrigerator with a magnet. At first, it was small amounts. A few dollars for every bite I didn't finish. A little more if I gagged. And if I vomited? That was destruction of property. A full fine. The rules grew overnight. I had 5 minutes per food item. No water until the plate was empty. No bathroom breaks. No leaving the chair until the meal was resolved. He even started charging retail prices for food I couldn't get down. Chicken breast, $3. 50, green beans, $1. 25, mashed potatoes, 75 cents. He wrote it all out like some kind of twisted grocery store ledger. The first time I couldn't finish beef stew, he timed me with his stopwatch. The meat was dry and stringy, the carrots mushy and sweet. I gagged on the first one, and Gary made a note, warning. Next gag is a fine. I forced another down, and my body rebelled. I vomited onto the plate. He didn't flinch. Just scribbled numbers. That's destruction of property, $850, plus cleanup. You'll work it off. Then he shoved a bucket and rag across the table. I cleaned my own mess while crying, while my mom sat in silence with her fork untouched. That became the routine. Every meal, Gary sat across from me with his stopwatch and ledger. Every gag, every hesitation, every tremor of my hands became another tally on the fridge. My debt climbed daily, $200, $525, $850. At school, I grew weaker. In gym class, I almost fainted during jumping jacks. The nurse handed me crackers and whispered, "Eat these slowly." I saved them like treasure, rationing them for days when dinner became impossible. But Gary noticed when I tried to fill up on easier foods. He started serving me only the ones that made me gag: mushrooms, liver, fish with bones. He'd sit across from me, stopwatch ticking, while I struggled to swallow. Then came the oysters. He set a plate of them in front of me one night like it was some kind of luxury. Slimy, grey, smelling like the ocean at low tide. My stomach turned before I even picked one up. "No fork," Gary said coldly. "Proper oyster eating. Straight from the shell." My hand shook as I brought one to my lips. The oyster slid around, cold and wet, and my whole body revolted. I dropped the shell with a clatter. "Destruction of property," Gary said, writing another charge. "That's $12 for the dozen." "I can't," I whispered. "Then pay for them." "I don't have money." "Then eat them." We sat there for 3 hours. Me and a plate of oysters, him with his stopwatch. I managed to swallow one. It came right back up. He added more to the debt. By the end of the night, I owed him another $47. My total was over $500. He started talking about selling my things to cover it. My bike. My books. Even the tablet my grandma had given me before she passed. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd dream about drowning in food, about plates that never emptied, about his stopwatch ticking louder and louder until I woke up gasping. 3 weeks after the Carter dinner, Gary came home in one of his quiet moods. He said the promotion had gone to someone else. Not him. He didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he got very still. That night, he announced new rules. Breakfast would now be monitored. Lunches packed and inspected when I got home. Any uneaten food? Retail fines. Laura tried to object, her voice trembling. "Gary, she's losing weight." The school nurse called. Gary gave her that smile, that not smile. Then she should eat her meals. "She can't." "You know she can't." "I know she won't." "There's a difference." When Laura whispered, "This is abuse," the room went dead quiet. Gary turned his gaze on her. "Is it? Is feeding a child abuse? Is teaching responsibility abuse? Or is the real abuse letting a child grow up thinking the world will cater to her every whim?" He stepped closer. Laura backed against the counter, her hands trembling. "If you think I'm abusive," he said softly, "then there's the door. Take your daughter. See how far you get without my income." Her face crumpled. She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. Gary turned back to me. "Breakfast starts tomorrow. 6 a.m. sharp. Full meal, clean plate, or pay retail." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my stomach growling. I knew now it wasn't just about food or rules or even discipline. Gary wasn't teaching me responsibility. He was breaking me. And he was only getting started. By the time Gary added breakfast inspections to the rules, I'd stopped thinking of the fridge tally as numbers. They were years of my life, stolen and marked in black ink. $612. $734. $847. I wasn't Madison anymore. I was a ledger entry. The thing was, Gary thought he was smart. He thought every fine, every stopwatch tick, every retching gag was proof of his discipline. But it wasn't. It was evidence. I started keeping a notebook under my mattress. Cheap spiral-bound, the kind the school sold for 50 cents. In it, I wrote everything. The food. The portion size. The prices he assigned. How long I sat in the folding chair. How many times I vomited. I even sketched pictures of the meals that haunted me most, the slimy oysters, the bloody slabs of liver, the bowl of coleslaw so heavy with mayonnaise it made my eyes water. At school, I'd sneak into the library. Mrs. Grant, the librarian, noticed I was there almost every lunch. "Aren't you hungry?" she asked gently once. I shook my head, clutching my stomach. She frowned, but let it go. Instead of eating, I researched. Autism. Sensory processing. Texture aversions. I printed articles, slipping them into the back of my notebook. My brain wasn't broken. It was wired differently. There was science behind it. But I knew Gary wouldn't care. He didn't believe in autism. He believed in control. Still, I couldn't shake one thought: he cared about appearances. I kept remembering the Carter dinner. The way his jaw clenched when Elaine Carter asked if I liked lamb. The way his entire face froze when I vomited across their tablecloth. For a moment, just a flicker, his perfect mask cracked. Gary's obsession wasn't just with me. It was with being seen as a successful family man. The kind of man bosses promoted. The kind of man neighbors respected. The kind of man who never lost control. And maybe, just maybe, that was his weak spot. But first, I had to survive. Breakfast was the worst. At 6 a.m. sharp, Gary would set a plate in front of me stacked high with eggs, bacon, and toast. Enough for 3 people. He'd click his stopwatch and sit across from me with his notepad, scribbling prices. Lunch was packed in a brown paper bag with each item labeled. An apple, $1. 25, peanut butter sandwich, $2. 50, carrot sticks, 75 cents. Return uneaten food for inspection, his note read. After school, he'd weigh every leftover piece on his kitchen scale, adding charges to the fridge tally. Dinner was the same hell as always. Liver, sardines, blue cheese, pickled herring. Foods chosen specifically because he knew I couldn't stand them. One night, he brought home raw tuna. He called it sashimi, arranged on a plate like some gourmet display. But to me, it was just slabs of cold rubber. He gave me enough for 4 people, his eyes never leaving mine as I tried to chew. I vomited 4 times before he finally released me from the chair. My debt jumped another $68. My mom barely ate anymore. She'd push her food around, lips trembling, eyes dark. She was shrinking, too, her work uniform hanging loose on her frame. But she didn't say a word. Gary's presence had hollowed her out. I lay awake at night, my notebook clutched to my chest. I dreamed of escape, but I was only 13. I had no money. No car. No way out. Then, during library period one afternoon, I overheard something that made my stomach flip. Gary's company was holding a family picnic. 2 weeks away. All employees and their families invited. Games, food, team building. And Mr. and Mrs. Carter would be there. I stared down at my notebook, my shaky handwriting documenting every fine, every gag, every dollar added to my debt. For the first time, I wondered if maybe this wasn't just a record. Maybe it could be a weapon. That night at dinner, Gary served Brussels sprouts swimming in butter. The smell alone made bile rise in my throat. As I pushed them around, I casually mentioned, school's having a nutrition week. We're supposed to track our meals. Gary's fork froze midair. What kind of report? Just portion sizes, meal times, family dinner dynamics. Photos, too. I tried to keep my voice steady. His eyes narrowed. You're not participating. Okay, I mumbled, shoving a sprout into my mouth, gagging as it slid down my throat. But inside, the seed was planted. Over the next week, Gary's paranoia grew. He started checking my backpack, rifling through my binders, searching my room. But my real notes? They stayed locked in my school locker, safe where he couldn't touch them. 1 week before the picnic, I began working on something new. In the library, I typed up a presentation. Simple slides with photos of my plates, the food price lists Gary left on the counter, a graph showing my weight loss over the past month. I titled it, My Family's Approach to Nutrition Education. I printed 3 copies and tucked them inside my math textbook. Gary never checked my textbooks. At dinner the night before the picnic, Gary was in unusually high spirits. He laid out our clothes, gave us rehearsed conversation lines, reminded us about manners. He served me a normal portion of spaghetti for once, only charging $5 for what I couldn't finish. I smiled at him, pretending to be grateful. But in my purse upstairs, folded carefully, were 3 copies of the presentation. One for Mr. Carter. One for Elaine. And one for whoever else needed to see it. The fridge tally read $852 that night. But I was done being a number. Because tomorrow, I was going to make sure everyone saw the truth. The morning of the company picnic, Gary was practically glowing. He'd ironed his polo shirt the night before, lined up our outfits like we were dolls. He checked my dress twice, tugging the belt tighter around my shrinking waist. In the car, he laid out the rules again. Smile. Eat everything. No excuses. No embarrassment. He wanted perfection. We pulled up to a park in Worthington, the kind with wide pavilions, barbecue smoke hanging in the air, and kids running between tables stacked with food. Gary's hand clamped down on my shoulder as he steered us through the crowd toward Mr. Carter and his wife. Elaine Carter spotted me first. Her eyes flicked over my hollow cheeks, my dress that had fit 2 months ago but now sagged around me. She smiled politely, but there was something sharp behind her gaze. Gary launched into his performance immediately. Handshakes. Compliments. Jokes rehearsed in the mirror. Madison's doing great in school. Laura's just thriving. With a perfect family. I stayed quiet, fingers clutching my purse. Inside were the 3 copies of my presentation, folded crisp, waiting. We joined a table with 2 other families. Gary positioned me where he could watch every bite. The buffet line had everything: potato salad, hot dogs, burgers, chips. My plate looked like a rainbow of dread. Across from me, a little girl wrinkled her nose and pushed away her potato salad. Her mom just laughed and gave her fruit instead. Gary's jaw tightened. His hand pressed against my back, fingers digging hard enough to hurt. I tried. Bite after bite. Chewing carefully, spacing it out, pretending like it was normal. But the mix of mayonnaise, butter, and smoke made my throat seize. Tears pricked my eyes as I forced down another forkful. That's when Elaine Carter appeared at our table. "Anyone need anything?" she asked, her eyes on me. Gary cut in smoothly. "Everything's wonderful. The food is excellent." Elaine leaned closer. "You look pale, Madison. Do you want to take a break? There are sack races and face painting by the playground." Before I could answer, Mr. Carter called Gary over to meet someone from corporate. Gary hesitated, then reluctantly left, shooting me a warning glare. Elaine sat down in his spot. Her voice dropped low. "I remember the dinner party. You struggled with textures, didn't you? My nephew's autistic. Food was always a battle for him too." I stared at her, my mouth dry. My mother sat frozen beside me, silent. Elaine asked softly, "Has anyone ever evaluated you for sensory processing differences?" My throat burned, but I nodded. Words spilled out before I could stop them, about my diagnosis, about textures that made me gag, about the chair, the stopwatch, the debt. And then, my hand moved on its own. I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the folded packets. "I made this for school," I whispered. "It explains everything." Elaine's eyes flickered with recognition as she unfolded the pages. Photos of my overloaded plates. The price list Gary wrote out. A chart showing my weight loss. Notes about hours spent in the folding chair, about vomiting, about the $852 tally taped to our fridge. Gary returned just as she reached the last page, the mirror photo I'd taken that morning of my body hanging in a dress that no longer fit, next to a school photo from 3 months ago when I looked like a normal 13-year-old girl. His face went red, then white. He lunged for the papers, but Elaine pulled them closer. "Is this accurate?" she asked, her voice sharp now. Gary laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "It's a teaching tool. Responsibility. Financial literacy. Kids these days waste food, they need discipline." Elaine's eyes didn't waver. "You're charging a child $852 for gagging on food." By now, people were watching. Mr. Carter stepped closer, brows furrowed. A couple of Gary's co-workers leaned in, whispering as they glanced at the photos. I pulled the other copies from my purse, sliding one to a woman from Gary's department who had smiled at me earlier, another to a man who'd asked about school. They read in silence. Gary sputtered about privacy and family business, his voice climbing. And then, for the first time, Laura spoke. Her voice was shaky but clear. "It's true. Every word. The fines, the chair, the debt. He started it after Madison got sick at your dinner party. She owes him $852. Gary's face twisted. "We agreed never to." "Some things are more important than money," Laura cut in, her hand trembling on the table. The picnic had gone quiet. Families at nearby tables were staring now. Mr. Carter held the packet in his hands, flipping through each page with a grim expression. "So you force a 13-year-old to eat adult-sized portions until she vomits, then fine her for the waste? And you call this discipline?" Gary's perfect mask cracked. He stammered, then grew frantic. "Ungrateful. Manipulation. Everyone enables this kind of weakness. You don't know what it's like to raise a spoiled." "Enough," Mr. Carter said flatly. Gary froze. Elaine's hand landed on my shoulder, steady and warm. "Laura, do you and Madison have somewhere safe to go?" My mom's lip quivered. "My sister. 2 hours away." "Call her," Elaine said firmly, pulling out her phone. Laura's hands shook as she dialed, explaining in halting words what had happened. Across the park, Gary was still flailing, his voice cracking as he tried to spin his story to anyone who would listen. Security guards hovered nearby. His co-workers avoided his eyes. When my aunt's car pulled up, I thought Gary would explode. His face burned with rage as we gathered our things, as my aunt hugged me tight, as Laura whispered, "It's over." Gary shouted across the picnic, "You'll regret this. You can't survive without me." But Elaine stepped between us, her voice calm and cutting. "You've already survived without yourself." And just like that, Laura and I walked away. My aunt's arms around us. My presentation still clutched in my hands. Gary's voice echoed behind us, furious, desperate, cracking apart. But I didn't look back. We didn't go home with Gary that day. My aunt's car smelled like cinnamon gum and dog hair, and for the first time in months, the air felt safe. Laura cried silently in the passenger seat while my aunt drove us back to her house in Dublin. I sat in the back clutching my presentation, afraid that if I let go, everything might disappear. At my aunt's house, dinner was simple: grilled cheese sandwiches, apple slices, a bowl of chips in the middle of the table. Nobody tapped a watch. Nobody calculated the cost. When I said I was full, my aunt just nodded. "Okay, kiddo. Save the rest for later." I nearly broke down right there, because that was it, that was all I had needed. The next morning, my aunt called a lawyer. She knew someone who specialized in family law, and by noon, Laura was in his office shaking as she explained everything. My notebook, the fridge tally, my presentation, all of it became evidence. The lawyer nodded gravely and said 2 words that made my skin tingle: financial abuse. Gary tried to contact us immediately. Calls. Emails. Voicemails that swung between rage and begging. "You've ruined me. I'll change. You'll come crawling back." We didn't answer. 2 weeks later, we returned to the old house with a police escort. Gary wasn't there, he'd been ordered to stay away. The tally sheet still hung on the fridge in bold black marker, $852. I pulled it down, folded it carefully, and tucked it into my notebook. In court, Gary was a storm. He tried to spin it all as a financial literacy program. He even forged worksheets to make it look like he was teaching responsibility. But my presentation had already circulated. Witnesses from the picnic gave statements. Elaine Carter wrote a detailed affidavit describing the dinner party and the picnic. Mr. Carter himself submitted a note about how Gary's behavior reflected poorly on the company's values. The judge listened, sharp-eyed, flipping through the photos of my plates, the debt tally, the medical records showing my weight loss. "This is not parenting," she said finally. "This is documented harm." Gary was ordered to pay child support and alimony. Visitation was restricted to supervised visits, and only if I agreed. I never did. He lost his job, too. HR at his company labeled his conduct incompatible with values. His reputation, the one thing he prized more than control, crumbled overnight. Laura, my mom, got a job at a bakery. For the first time in years, she smiled at work. She decorated cakes with tiny flowers and swirls, her hand steady again. My aunt became our anchor, turning her home office into a bedroom for me, painting the walls light blue. She filled the fridge with food I could choose from freely, snacks, fruit, cereal, no timers, no punishments. It wasn't easy. For months, food was still terrifying. Even safe meals made my throat close sometimes. My aunt never forced me. She'd leave crackers in the living room, apple slices on the counter. Little ways to remind me that food could be choice, not war. Slowly, my body started to trust again. I started therapy, too. My therapist understood autism and eating trauma. She taught me strategies for handling textures, for calming panic attacks, for reclaiming control. Gary, meanwhile, faded into rumor. Last I heard, he'd moved to Indiana, living in a one-bedroom apartment, still muttering about how he'd been wronged. But that was his story, not mine. Because mine was about survival. 1 year later, at my aunt's kitchen table, I ate birthday cake without fear. Vanilla with raspberry filling. I left half the slice uneaten, and nobody said a word. When I started high school, I joined the art club. My paintings were messy, chaotic, but mine. I used the old fridge tally in one piece, turning the numbers into stars scattered across a night sky. Elaine Carter bought it at a charity auction and hung it in her office. She told me, truth has power when it's brought into the light. She was right. Years later, when I applied to college, I wrote my admissions essay about that metal folding chair. About how something meant to break me became the reason I wanted to study art therapy, because sometimes words aren't enough, and kids like me need another way to tell their stories. The essay won me a scholarship. I used the money to take my mom and aunt out for dinner. We ordered whatever we wanted. We laughed. We left food on our plates. And nobody wrote a number on a fridge. That night, as we walked out of the restaurant, the thought hit me so hard I had to stop. Gary's debt never got paid. Not the $852, not the $15,285, not any of it. Because it was never mine to pay. The only debt I owed was to myself. And I'd finally started paying it back.